Yesterday, Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris unveiled more of her economic policies, including a proposal that would offer tax breaks for small businesses.
I want to see 25 million new small business applications by the end of my first term. So, part of my plan is we will expand the tax deduction for startups to $50,000. Essentially a tax cut for starting a small business.
Because the economy and inflation are top priorities for voters, many are wondering, how do Harris's economic policies compare to former President Trump's? And how do they compare to President Biden's? Joining me now to discuss this is Dr. Paul Mueller, Senior Research Fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. Dr. Mueller, welcome to Washington Watch.
Thanks for having me.
Well, walk us through the key points as you see them of Kamala Harris's economic plan for America.
Well, the way I see it is Kamala Harris is running a giveaway campaign. That is to say, she's trying to give away things to the American people. So the tax cut or the tax credit that she referred to with starting new businesses is one example. She's talked about increasing credits to first-time home buyers. She's talked about eliminating the tax on tips. Of course, the Biden administration has been trying to cancel various forms of student debt for years now. And her approach, I think, to stimulating the economy is more of what we've seen over the past 4 years, which is extensive government involvement, huge amounts of spending. It's not really an organic growth within the economy. It's more stimulative government involvement in trying to get things going.
Now, say a bit more about that, if you would. Why isn't it good? You know, we're consumers, we're homeowners, we're entrepreneurs. We'd like to start businesses. Why is it a bad idea to get a $50,000 tax credit to start my new business and $25,000 to buy my new house?
Sure. So I'm an economist. Economists always talk about the law of unintended consequences. And then that's the big thing we have to worry about here. So the big issue, which maybe we can come back to, is all of this adds to national debt, which is going to put pressure on national finances. Other government programs may lead to larger tax increases in the future, which the Harris campaign has also proposed, raising capital gains taxes, proposed a wealth tax. So there's no such thing as a free lunch, Milton Friedman used to say. But the other piece of it is you never quite know how people are going to respond. So when let's take the tax credit for starting new businesses. There are a lot of small business owners who maybe will close down their existing business and start a new one just to get the tax credit, right? And you're going to see funding of more businesses that maybe are riskier or more marginal. And in a normal setting, they wouldn't necessarily get off the ground, but with this big subsidy, maybe they will, and they won't be as efficient. So that's one thing to worry about. Let's talk about the home subsidy for a second, because this is also actually a very important concept. When we subsidize people's ability to buy things, so whether that's higher education or healthcare, and we give people money in the form of loans or grants or scholarships to do that, what it does is it boosts demand. And so what we see over time in both of those areas is rising costs. The cost of higher education has grown much faster than everything else in the economy. The rate of increase for healthcare has increased very rapidly. And so this $25,000 credit for first-time home buyers, while it sounds nice, is actually going to continue to put upward pressure on the price of housing overall. And so it's actually going to be eaten up by rising prices.
Yeah, you make an interesting point there about the ability to open and close businesses, because it could seem, because $50,000 is a lot of money in a tax credit, and it could, and it seems, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, that could be a matter of paperwork, where one business says, well, I'm going to close this LLC and just transfer all the assets and all the operations to another LLC just so I can get a $50,000 cut. And economically, maybe nothing has changed at all. Is that the kind of loophole that would be created here?
Potentially. I mean, so they're gonna try, obviously, to avoid that. But one thing that we've seen in a very recent history is that large government programs that hand out a lot of money are not very good at policing fraud. And so if you look back at a number of the COVID programs, whether it was paycheck protection or other kinds of subsidies, we are still sorting out tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars of fraudulent or at least incorrect kind of filings for payments for employees. It was a nightmare. It was a mess. It was a free-for-all with all that money being handed out. And this kind of thing, maybe at a smaller scale, I would not be surprised to see something very similar. Of course, they'll try to write the rules to avoid the exact thing that you suggest, but the devil's in the details, and people tend to be very clever and figure out ways to get around it. So that's just one reason to be concerned about something that sounds simple and really good might not be the best way. What we want instead is more sustainable fundamental policy change. And when it comes to overall tax policy, when it comes to regulatory policy, making it easier just to start businesses, to operate businesses, to not have the government on your back when you're working on these things, that would be, I would argue, a much better way to promote robust economic growth.
Is there anyone proposing that?
Well, elements of President Trump's agenda have pieces of that. So he has talked about wanting to roll back regulations. That was something that was a big part of his first term, and he's talked about making that a big part of the second term. That would be very helpful. Of course, there were the Trump tax cuts that happened a number of years ago under his term, and those are set to expire. And so I think he would probably work to keep those in place, and that would be helpful. The two downsides to the Trump campaign's approach, two things that would concern me or that are not going to help growth, are one, he has strongly endorsed tariffs, raising tariffs, which are forms of taxes on goods coming into and out of the country, or goods coming into the country, which make it harder to ship goods out of the country. So that's not great for growth. And then he hasn't really addressed runaway government spending. And the more money that is spent by the federal government, the less money there is for people in the private sector to spend on their businesses, their houses, their projects. So those are two areas where the Trump administration could, or the Trump campaign could be more pro-growth than they are. But on the regulation front, on the tax front, they would have a much better plan for robust economic growth.
I wish we had more time to say more about your last point there, because $35 trillion of debt and growing every day seems to be something that we need to deal with. But so far, we are not seeing a lot of politicians raise their hand and say, I'm the guy that's going to give you less so we can save the future. I think that might be what we need. We're not getting that from anybody at this point, but we're going to have to save that conversation for another day. Dr. Mueller, thank you so much for your time.
Sounds good. Thank you.